All right, we just looked at Egypt as our example of the Islamic heartlands, and we've looked at the Ottoman Empire in this chapter. Next, we're going to look at what's going on in China. Now, notice the title of this section, The Last Dynasty, the rise and fall of the Qing Empire in China. It gets the nickname The Last Dynasty because, well, it is the last dynasty in China. There will be no more emperors after the Qing. After the Qing fall in the early 1900s, shortly before World War I, there will be no more Qing Empire. There'll be no more emperors in China. So, remember the Manchus. Now, the Manchus come out of up here, above Korea. Remember, see Korea right here in white on the map? Manchus are up here, north of Beijing. And if you remember, the Ming had actually invited Manchu warriors in to help them against a peasant uprising. Manchus got there, said, hey, look at this. We can take over China. So they stayed and did. But they know a little bit about history, and they decide they're not going to make the mistakes the Mongols made in ruling China. So, first thing they do is they retain the examination system. That means the civil service exam. And they let their own sons take courses. They say, we are the most recent son of heaven. We have received the mandate of heaven. And so we're going to adopt their ideology, Chinese ideology on the mandate of heaven and doing what's right for people and that kind of stuff. They're going to practice traditional Confucian virtues. They're going to adopt Confucian principles in their government. This will endear them to the Chinese. And they'll become patrons of the Chinese arts. So they try to endear themselves with the traditional Chinese practices of mandate of heaven, Confucius, and Chinese arts. So it looks pretty good for them. They also try to maintain traditional Chinese social structure, respect and acceptance of rank and hierarchy. Remember, under Confucianism, one of the things you're supposed to do under Confucianism is know your place and stay in your place. Know your rank and stay there. Do what you're supposed to do. They also have suspicion, traditional Chinese thing, of other social organizations, guilds, secret societies, these kind of things. They're deeply suspicious of that. What about how they treat women? Well, women are treated poorly. Remember, women always have been treated poorly under Confucianism. It makes sense to us. Remember, women are subservient to men, and young are subservient to the old. Infanticide, that means the killing of infants, increases. Men actually outnumber women. If you want to draw a parallel to today, that still goes on today. There are estimates that between India and China, there are about 100 million fewer girls than there should be in those countries based on proportions and populations. So men outnumber women. Part of it is in Chinese history, women are a financial drain on the household. In other words, if you want to marry your daughter off, you've got to have a dowry. You've got to give away a dowry on her. Males marry women below them in social status. This is a way to control women. If you marry a poor woman, she should just be happy to be in your wealthier household and shouldn't challenge you. So it's a way of controlling women. The one place women do have a little power seems to be in elite households. There they control other women and perhaps younger men. But for women, it's not real good. Remember, Confucianism as a philosophy doesn't usually put women very high up the social status. Remember, that's why we've seen things like foot binding in Chinese history, things like that. All right. So, but by 1750, the 1800s really, the Qing is weakening. Why? Well, one of the problems the Qing has encountered is the civil service exam. The system that once gave them the best and the brightest young men in China has now become riddled with cheating and favoritism. They bribe examiners. Scholars are paid to take the exam for the rich. I don't know if you guys heard this recently, but there was a very prestigious school. I think it was in New York, New Jersey, New York, up around New York City. Very prestigious school, high school. And it turned out that they were having, some of the students there were bribing college students or other people to take their SATs for them so that they got really good scores. Scholars are paid to take the exam for the rich. Sons of officials are put in places of power. Uh, no longer do we do the meritocracy. We've used that term a lot. Meritocracy is just what the word looks like. It's based on merit. Now we've got a thing called nepotism coming in. Now, nepotism is where you hire not necessarily the most qualified, but you hire your family and friends to run things. Merchants, landowners are put in power. There's a lack of Confucian values. That weakens the system. And this one you got to remember the mandate of heaven. The bureaucracy, that is, the government officials, become means of improving the lives of the wealthy, not the poor. Because remember, under the mandate of heaven, the thing that allows you to rule is the fact that you're doing good for people, right? You're doing what's good for people. And when you stop that, you lose the mandate of heaven. And what has happened is these men who get the government jobs are now using it as a way to line their own pockets rather than doing what's good for people. You're going to see that in the next slide as well. Um, Money is now given to wealthy families, not for infrastructure. Now, you remember infrastructure. We defined it earlier in the semester. But in case you forgot what infrastructure is, these are the machines, the things that do the work for you. Infrastructure, bridges, roads. And one of the big things you've got to do in China is you've got to protect people against floods. When the Yellow River and the Yangtze, but particularly the Yellow River floods, it is devastating. And flood control is huge in China. Money taken from the military, they're left unprotected against outsiders. You're going to see the new outsiders are not locals, but going to be Europeans. That's coming up. The new outsiders are going to be Europeans. And you have unrepaired dikes. They destroy land, create famine, disease, and then people start moving around. Widespread migration. By this I mean within China, migration within China. And that leads to banditry, which means a bunch of thieves roaming the roads, stealing from people to live. So things have gotten really rough. And at the moment things are getting rough, you've got new intruders. And that's what we'll talk about next.